The sky cracked open with a sound like tearing metal as the shuttle plummeted through Earth's atmosphere. Wind screamed against the hull, straps bit into Kale's shoulders. Across from him, a Threxian cadet vomited into its breathing mask, and a Virali student clutched at its ocular stalks, whimpering in clicks no translator could soften. Kale closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. This wasn't a simulation. This was the start of the Deathworld aptitude trial, and they were descending into hell. The cabin shuddered violently as turbulence pitched them sideways. Equipment boxes broke loose, slamming into a shrieking Nerovian. No one was ready. Not the elite predator species bred for jungle warfare, not the frostborn strategists from methane moons, and certainly not Kale, whose survival training included exactly one YouTube video about tent setup and a panic-induced memory of his mother slapping a huntsman spider off the living room wall with a flip-flop. When the shuttle finally skidded to a halt in a choking cloud of red dust and eucalyptus ash, silence fell, shaken, tense, alive with the subtle terror of the unknown. Somewhere outside, something let out a deep, guttural bark. Kale unbuckled his harness with shaking fingers and whispered to no one in particular. Well, that didn't feel like orientation. A month ago, Kale had arrived at GalactIQ University unnoticed. Among a sea of iridescent scales, bioluminescent skin, and students with air filters for lungs, a quiet human from Indiana didn't draw many eyes. He was soft-spoken, respectful, always last in tactical simulations. He failed the grav combat drill so hard the instructor reset the module twice, thinking it had glitched. His file was thick with academic notes, cooperative but non-assertive, physically limited, overly passive in group dynamics. It made him the perfect candidate for what they called Team Delta 7, a polite label for the group no one expected to succeed. His teammates included Giral, a towering insectoid from the Kamari cluster who never referred to Kale by name, Jorix, a cold-blooded creature with silvery fronds that twitched whenever Kale spoke, and Vale, a Kyrethian strategist who once told him, without malice, "Your presence is statistically irrelevant." They hit dirt with a thud and emerged into the reality of Australia's Northern Territory during the dry season. The heat was like walking into an oven with a blowtorch in your face. One alien immediately dropped their pack in shock as flies swarmed their mucus-slick skin. "No signal," Jorix hissed, slapping at his datapad. "Atmospheric interference. That is not in the pre-brief." "Welcome to Earth," Kale muttered. He adjusted his pack. No one heard him. Professor Danik's voice buzzed over their wrist comms. "This is day 1 of the Deathworld aptitude trial. Your objective is to survive 10 planetary rotations and complete a cooperative beacon construction on day 10. Teams will be evaluated on resource management, cohesion, and resilience. Good luck." That was it. No welcome briefing, no supplies beyond a basic field pack and medical kit. A map, a knife, a fire starter, and 1 flask per student. The terrain was hostile, the vegetation clawed at boots. Cicadas screamed at a frequency that made some alien students physically nauseous. A purple-skinned Xeric tried to eat a leaf and threw up immediately. 1 hour in, half the teams were already in trouble. Kale's team wandered until midday before collapsing in a dusty grove beneath a thorny tree. No one offered ideas. They argued over direction. Vale suggested digging into the red earth for shelter, but the soil was dry and full of biting ants. Kale watched a line of them crawl along a route and said gently, "You don't want to mess with those." "You're not a xenoentomologist?" Kestrel snapped. No one dug. 10 minutes later, a Zarthian cadet sat on one and was bitten. Its carapace swelled grotesquely in seconds. It howled, flailing as foam spilled from its mandible. Its mouth. Kale ran forward. "Hold still." The alien thrashed. "Hold it down," Kale barked. Calspar froze, but moved to restrain the limb. Kale yanked out his first aid kit and dug for antihistamines and a pressure wrap. No venom extractor, but he knew what mattered, slowing the swelling, controlling the shock. He elevated the limb, keeping his voice low. "You're okay. It's not fatal, just a massive histamine response. Keep breathing." 20 minutes later, the alien could sit up. Khazaral said nothing, neither did Vale, but no one dismissed him for the next hour. Later, while the others sat fuming and drained, Kale gathered dry bark, leaves, and stringy eucalyptus fiber. He used the serrated edge of his knife to cut vines from a nearby tree, wrapping them around a crude triangle of snapped branches. He worked steadily as sweat soaked his shirt, ignoring the occasional eye roll from Jorix. By nightfall, he had made a passable lean-to. He crawled under it alone. At 2 a.m., a karat stumbled into the grove and collapsed. Heat exhaustion. Kale pulled him into shade and cracked open a water pouch, dripping it slowly into the creature's beak-like mouth. He propped the alien's legs up, shaded the eyes, and loosened its thermal suit. Jorix stood a few paces away. "Why are you wasting water on another team?" Kale didn't answer. The alien survived the night. By morning, two things had happened. First, half the teams had already moved camps, hoping for cooler terrain. Second, rumors began to spread that someone in Delta 7 had administered medical care during the night. "Was it Vael?" someone whispered in passing. "She wouldn't get her hands dirty," another scoffed. Kale was already collecting wood for a better fire base. Day 2 brought its own disasters. The morning heat ramped up early. At least 3 species lacked sweat glands, which led to rapid overheating. Khazaral tried to scare off a curious kangaroo and instead got punched in the chest, staggering backward with a bruised exoskeletal plate. Kale was the only one who didn't laugh. He stepped forward, assessing the hit. "No fractures, just bruised," he glanced up. "Don't get close, they'll box you if they feel cornered." Skrull hissed, but didn't contradict him. Around midday, someone screamed from the bush line. Kale sprinted first. A long, thin snake, probably a brown snake, was coiled beside a fallen student. It was already moving off. "Did it bite you?" Kale asked. "No," the alien sobbed. "It struck at me. I tripped." Kale nodded and walked back to camp. 15 minutes later, he returned with a camp shovel. The snake had circled back. He approached it calmly, shovel in hand. One quick motion, he pinned its head, then struck again, clean and deliberate. The snake didn't move again. That night, no one laughed at his lean-to. Vale crawled under it first. She didn't ask. She just lay down, shivering under a mylar sheet. By the morning of day 3, things had changed. Students from other teams approached their camp, asking if Kale had spare water rations, asking if he had advice for where to build latrines or what was safe to eat. Kale never refused. He didn't lead discussions. He asked questions. "What's your resting temperature? Do you metabolize plant protein? How much light bothers your eyes?" One alien scoffed at him for asking. That night, it walked face first into a nest of flying foxes and fled screaming. By day 4, Delta 7 had the best shelter in the area, an established latrine pit and a hand-dug trench to channel away rainwater. They hadn't seen a drop of rain yet, but Kale knew it would come. He also knew they were being watched. Orbiting cameras. Professor Danik's periodic updates. 4 teams have failed to maintain integrity, the voice said over their comms. Injuries and medical extractions will impact your scores. Adjust accordingly. But Kale never talked about scores. He asked who was limping, who had eaten, who had slept. On day 5, a Nerovian cadet from Team Alpha went missing. By nightfall, panic had spread. The cadet's trail had vanished after a water run. Most students assumed it had been attacked. Professor Danik made no announcement. Kale grabbed his light, a whistle, and motioned to Khazaral. "We're going to find her." "Why us?" Skrull asked. "She's not in our team." "She's someone." They left at dusk. Kale led the way, using broken brush, snapped twigs, and disturbed earth. Khazaral didn't understand the signs, but he followed. They found her trapped in a gully, dislocated shoulder, dehydrated. Kale stabilized her with a splint made of his own tent poles and a belt, then led them both back by moonlight. That night, Gizerl stood first watch without being asked. Kale didn't say thank you, he just handed him a snack ration and moved on to tend the injured cadet. Tomorrow, the storm would come. But Kale didn't know that yet. All he knew was Earth. And his job wasn't to survive it alone, it was to make sure they all did. By dawn of day 6, the humidity clung like wet wool. Kale stood before the shelter, staring at the sky. The clouds were wrong. High, fast, smeared like bruises across the atmosphere. The air had the thick stillness he remembered from childhood power outages and flooded basements. Kale turned to Gizerl, who had grown surprisingly compliant since the rescue. Tie down the shelter, vines, more tension across the top. Jorix muttered, "You believe a storm is coming. From what? Patternless cumulonimbus formations?" Kale didn't answer. He moved faster, reinforcing the ditch with flat stones, pressing palm-sized ones against the tarp corners. Vale began organizing food capsules into a dry pack, sealing them in a woven bark wrap. She didn't ask for help, but Jorix started copying her method within minutes. At midday, it hit. The first gust slammed through the grove like a fist, sending loose branches flying. One of the lean-to walls collapsed. Kale scrambled to rebuild it, shoving thicker poles deeper into the soil, anchoring them with torn rope and sweat-streaked resolve. The rain didn't fall, it detonated. Within minutes, the ground was saturated. Alien students from other camps staggered into the clearing, soaked and shivering, some clutching damaged gear. No one turned them away. There was no room to be proud in a monsoon. Threxian crouched beneath an overhanging branch, eyes wide. "There are flashes in the sky, loud ones." "Lightning," Kale said. "Get away from tall trees, spread out. Don't bunch together." "What does it do?" "Kills you." That got them moving. Water pooled fast, turning the trenches into channels. Kale redirected a runoff flow from the latrine area just in time, caking his arms in red mud to dig through a barrier. One alien Kavik from Team Gamma slipped and cracked his elbow against a rock, screaming. Kale ran to him, wading through shin-deep sludge. He carefully checked the joint's mobility. Kavik couldn't straighten it. Kavik palpated down the arm gently. The swelling was already noticeable. "Fracture. Probably radial head or olecranon," Kale muttered. "Don't move it." I can't feel my fingers." Kale sat him up carefully. "That's nerve pressure. We need to immobilize it." He used a rigid strip of scavenged plastic tubing, soft rags, and duct tape from his own medkit. He wrapped the arm tightly, creating a sling from the alien's cloak. "You'll need real care when we get back, but this will hold for now. You'll keep your arm." Kavik's breathing slowed. "You're not a doctor?" "No," Kale said. "I'm a linguistics student. My mom's a nurse. She made me read her trauma manual after I sliced my palm trying to open a can with a kitchen knife." Kavik stared at him as if he'd recited sorcery. By nightfall, their camp sheltered 14 students from 5 different teams. The fire pit was sodden. Kale showed them how to make a dry tinder bundle inside a canister, using shredded bark and insulation from a defunct pack. When the flame caught, students clapped. He didn't celebrate. He just handed out more water and split rations fairly, even when some protested the math. "You'll need glucose overnight," he explained, handing half of his own to Jorix, who stared at the food cube like it was stolen gold. That night, Kale didn't sleep, not more than 10 minutes at a time. Someone would wake, vomiting from stress. Another would hallucinate in low fever. Kale adjusted cloaks, re-wrapped limbs, boiled more water, dried a soaked blanket by the fire. His legs cramped from dehydration, and his left hand trembled from overuse. At dawn, Vale found him leaning against a tree, head tipped back. "You should rest," she said flatly. He blinked at her. "No one's in immediate danger?" "For now. Then I'll nap in shifts." She hesitated. "You reek." He smiled without humor. So does everyone. Over the next 2 days, the shift became undeniable. Aliens followed him without being asked. When he spoke, no one rolled eyes. They listened. Not because he was commanding, but because he always knew what to do next. He never claimed leadership. He assigned tasks like a teacher running out of class time. You three dig another trench. You check everyone's hands and feet for blisters. Heat rash can turn septic. If it looks red or smells sweet, tell me. He organized a rotation for sleep. Set up signs with scratch marks for those who couldn't speak aloud. Trained a photosensitive race to identify safe shadows by time of day and tree orientation. One night, he walked into the bush with 2 cadets and returned with a bundle of dry branches. "How did you find dry wood?" Jorix asked, incredulous. "Termite mounds," Kale said. "They hollow out logs that stay insulated. My neighbor taught me. He made art from the stuff." On day 8, Professor Danick's voice cut through the comms. "Attention. Due to withdrawal numbers, scoring methodology will be adjusted. Reminder, the final task will begin on day 10. Full team cooperation is required. Further weather events are projected. Plan accordingly." As if on cue, the bush behind their camp shuddered. Everyone froze. Kale held up a hand. A low growl rumbled through the trees. Something moved, a blur of tan and sinew. It stopped short of the clearing, watching. "Dingo," Kale whispered. "Don't run. Don't look it in the eyes." The younger cadets shifted nervously. "Stand tall, quiet, let it leave." It did. Eventually, one virale collapsed after it was gone. Another threw up. Jorix turned to Kale. "You've encountered those before?" "Once, on a road trip. It tried to steal our lunch cooler." He didn't mention his cousin's panic, or the way his uncle screamed. That night, Kale noticed his fingers were shaking again. Not from dehydration, from exhaustion. His eyes stung. His back ached from the endless crouching, lifting, digging. When he tried to sleep, images of broken limbs and snapping snakes flickered behind his eyes. He'd memorized everyone's face now, knew who snored, who whimpered, who refused food unless coaxed. Still, he woke when someone coughed. Still checked every wound twice. By day 9, it was clear who was running things. Even the most arrogant cadets turned to him before making decisions. Khazral had once refused to follow him into the trees. Now he stood at Kale's side as they plotted the best angle for the signal beacon. Kale watched the sky. It was clearing. The land steamed in the heat. Tomorrow they'd have to work together to build a structure tall enough for orbital pickup. He knew that kind of task could break them physically, mentally, socially. He gathered the group that night. They sat in a rough circle. No one looked especially heroic. They were sunburned, blistered, dehydrated, hollow-eyed, but alive. He didn't give a speech. He handed out the last of the high-calorie rations, passing each one personally. "We'll need everyone tomorrow," he said. "And not everyone's strong right now, so we help each other." Silence followed. Then Kare stood. "I will carry materials. I have 4 limbs and shoulder joints designed for load distribution." The younger cadet added, "I can braid fastenings. My species' digits are highly dexterous." Jorix muttered, "I will climb. My claws can anchor mid-construction." Vale didn't speak, but she passed out tools she'd scavenged from 3 failed packs, cleaned and sharpened. Kale just nodded. "All right, then we'll build." Night fell on a different kind of camp. Not a place of survival, but of cooperation. Kale sat last watch, again. Not because he was the strongest, but because he knew where this was heading. And for the first time, he let himself hope it would be enough. By the 10th morning, the camp woke to silence. No wind, no cicadas, no distant bird shrieks or animal calls. Just a waiting stillness, like Earth itself had paused to watch. Kale was already moving before the others stirred. He splashed his face with the last of the boiled water and stared at the half-cleared rise just west of camp. That's where it would go? The signal tower. Kale didn't know orbital comm frequencies or transponder loadouts, but the instructions had been clear. Visible structure, high elevation, stable support, large enough to attract retrieval from orbit. Everything else, design, execution, cooperation, was up to them. That was the real test. Not survival, but whether they could build something together. He walked into the clearing and drove the first branch into the earth. The others joined without comment. They started by laying out materials. Stripped saplings, scavenged gear frames, leftover tubing from broken packs. Vale organized lengths by diameter. Jorik sharpened stakes with his claws, and Kazral used his powerful arms to drive support poles deep into the ground. No one argued. Not at first. But by mid-morning, stress cracked through the truce. A Gorath cadet from Team Theta insisted their architecture knowledge was superior. Your base is uneven. Any tower taller than 5 meters will collapse. Vale shot back. It's not about height. Visibility from orbit depends on profile against terrain. Kale calculated shadowfall last night. Another cadet scoffed. A linguistics student calculated shadowfall? Kale said nothing. He just knelt by the base and tightened the cross-joint binding. Slowly, deliberately. Jorix muttered. He also set 23 fractures, treated 2 cases of dehydration shock, removed a tick from a Flornian gland node, and knew how to boil eucalyptus to clear an infected wound. The Gorath blinked. What is a tick? Something I hope never to see again, Jorix said darkly. The bickering ebbed. Kale pointed to a support beam. Angle that in. More flex. It'll give in wind but not shear. Someone moved to adjust it. By noon, the tower was shoulder height, an open tripod frame, cross-braced, with wrapped fiber running down each leg for stability. Kazariel climbed the lowest rungs, hauling a salvageable comm dish they'd found embedded in a ravine 4 days ago. As the sun peaked, fatigue set in. One of the younger cadets misjudged their grip and fell, landing on Kale's outstretched arm. There was a sharp, wet crunch. Pain lit up his world like white fire. He didn't scream, but he did drop, curling over the arm and squeezing his eyes shut. His breath came in shallow gasps. Tural landed beside him. You're limp. Broken, Kale ground out. Ulna or both bones, midshaft. Then we must withdraw you. Kale opened his eyes and stared at him, sweat glistening on his brow. No. Jorik stepped forward. You cannot continue. I can't lift, Kale said, voice thin. But I can think. I can guide. Strap it. Sterile hesitated, then carefully removed Kale's pack and jacket. Vale had already pulled supplies. A short plank of hard bark, strips of fabric, sterile pad. As they wrapped his arm in a crude splint, Kale clenched his teeth hard enough his jaw clicked. I need elevation, reduced swelling, and a sling. They propped it with a makeshift loop of soft rope. Kale lay still for 2 minutes before forcing himself upright. You are shaking, Vale said, not unkindly. I'll shake less if I focus. They worked for hours. Jorix took over supervision of the eastern crossbeam. Vale directed lashing patterns. Kurzweil rerouted a load of tension when a brace snapped, narrowly avoiding collapse. Kale sat under a tree with his notepad, drawing angles and sketching wind projections from memory. Occasionally, someone asked him a question. He always answered. By evening, the tower stood nearly 3 meters tall, stable, braced, and with enough surface for the dish and reflective fabric to catch attention from orbit. But the last meter was the hardest. They needed height, and no one could agree how to get it. Kale watched it unfold like a quiet storm. 2 species with different gravity tolerances shouted over load limits. A photophobic species refused to climb in open light. Another tried to go it alone, breaking a rung and falling into a bush of stinging nettles. Kale finally stood, cradling his arm. Stop. They did. This isn't about being first, or best, or right. It's about all of us, finishing. Together. If we don't, we fail. That's it. No yelling, no speech, just quiet logic. One by one, heads nodded. They built the final segment as a relay. One climbed, another handed tools, a third checked lashings. By sunset, the dish was mounted. A strip of high-vis tarp rippled in the breeze like a flag. Kale remained on the ground, head tilted upward. It stood, and more importantly, it stayed up. They slept in staggered shifts that night. Everyone kept watch, not because of predators, but because the test was nearly over, and no one wanted to miss the end. At first light, the comms buzzed. "This is GalactIQ. Your beacon was located and verified. Extraction shuttles inbound. Prepare for debriefing and medical evaluation." Kale didn't move. His arm throbbed in a steady pulse of dull agony. The splint held, but the swelling had crept past the elbow, and he knew he'd need real treatment soon, possibly a realignment under anesthesia. He was exhausted, sore, and sunburned in places he hadn't known could burn. But the others? They were laughing. Tired, yes. Limping, yes. But alive. Standing. Together. When the first shuttle touched down, a thin plume of dust curling around it, Kale allowed himself a small smile, then promptly passed out from pain and fatigue. He woke in a sterile medbay aboard the university's orbital station, arm elevated in a soft cast, wrapped with sensors. An IV fed clear fluid into his left hand. His throat was dry, but when he turned his head, a nurse handed him water. "Displaced fracture," she said kindly. "We realigned it. No surgery needed. You'll be in a brace for 6 weeks." He nodded groggily. When he sat up, Professor Denick was there, flanked by other faculty. "Kale," he said, voice clipped. "Your team scored the highest cooperation metric recorded in 6 trial cycles. You led them." "I didn't lead." "You did." Vale's voice came from the doorway. "You just didn't order." Jorix followed her in. "Your method worked." Tyrol stepped inside, holding a data slate. The professors had to adjust their evaluation criteria. Professor Denick folded his arms. "You built a functional beacon on hostile terrain, organized cross-species labor, maintained morale under psychological strain, and administered emergency medical care. All without formal training." Kale blinked. I grew up in the city, never camped. My mom hiked. She kept old wilderness guides in the basement. I read them for fun. And panic. Silence. Then a long, measured inhale from Danik. "So it wasn't experience, it was you." Kale didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The ceremony was quiet. No fanfare. Just names listed, ranks updated, team photos stored in the database. As everyone filed out, a figure stopped at Kale's side. The Gorith cadet who'd mocked his calculations. It said nothing. Just handed him a folded piece of reflective tarp, the last bit from the signal beacon, and nodded. Then left. Kale stared at the tarp. No speech, no apology, just a gesture. It was enough. Kale's arm itched. Not the mild, passing kind, the deep, infuriating itch of healing bone under synthetic cast mesh. He sat in the recovery wing at GalactIQ University, one of 25 students being monitored for post-trial physical fatigue, bone trauma, or, in the case of one unlucky virale, a stubborn foot fungus acquired from walking barefoot in damp eucalyptus leaf beds. Across from him, a blue-scaled alien slurped nutrient gel through a straw and eyed him curiously. "You really never trained in survival?" "Nope," Kale said. "I went to a magnet school. Closest I came was dissecting a frog in bio class." "Then how did you know so much?" He shrugged. "I didn't. I just tried not to panic." The Ralali coughed a laugh. "That's not a survival skill where I come from. Panic is considered tactically responsible." Kale grinned, then winced. Even smiling made his jaw ache. He was down 8 pounds, muscle tone slightly degraded, and had spent the better part of 2 days rehydrating under IV drip. He still had bruises on his ribs from the fall. But every single person on his team had made it back. That counted for something. He stepped into the debrief chamber that afternoon alongside Vale, Jorix, and Kizarol. Other teams filed in slowly, some with visible limps, others with bandaged digits or sterilized gashes sealed in dermal mesh. Professor Danik stood before them all. The Deathworld aptitude trial, he began, was never a test of survival alone. It was an assessment of cooperation under extreme psychological and environmental duress. Earth was selected not just for its biological hostility, but for its chaos, its unpredictability, its raw indifference to your strengths. He tapped a display behind him. Graphs flicked up stress curves, cooperation models, biomechanical degradation. 70% of participants attempted solo excursions within the first 2 days. 54% of those required retrieval. Murmurs rippled across the room. Another 20% engaged in team infighting over leadership hierarchy. Only one team maintained operational cohesion. Injury triage, shared task labor, and multi-species housing for the full duration. The chart zoomed in. Team Delta 7, a red line of stress, a blue arc of cooperation, both steady. The room was silent. Professor Danik turned. Kale blinked. Yes? You're a linguistics student with no prior field training. Your scores in previous simulations were frankly pedestrian. Kale didn't disagree. And yet you stabilized morale, treated 10 injuries, planned shelter and ration logistics, and executed the beacon design with limited resources. You declined command, but your teammates followed you anyway. Kale shifted in his seat. I just did what I could. Precisely, Danik said. That's what made it work. He turned to the room. Humans are not apex predators. They are, however, apex survivors. Not because of strength, but because of adaptability, emotional resilience, and a deeply irrational instinct to help others, even when it doesn't benefit them. A pause. This trial was not designed for humans, but it may as well have been. He stepped back. You all have your results. Some students opened their data slates immediately. Others stared ahead, stunned. Kale didn't check his score. He watched as cadets began turning toward him, not all at once, but in small glances, nods. One Threxian gave a single, slow blink in his direction. For their kind, it was the equivalent of a bow. When Kale stepped outside, the sun was setting across the silver glass towers of GalactIQ's orbital campus. A warm breeze rolled off the environmental generators. Vale joined him. You were right, she said. About what? About it not being a survival test, it was a group test. Kale nodded. They thought Earth would break us. It did, she said, but only the ones who were competing. He chuckled. That sounds like a slogan. She tilted her head. You're going to get offers after this, from advanced tacticals, command academies, maybe even Earth's own interplanetary mediation corps. I'm not a leader, Kale said. Vale raised an eyebrow. You aren't, but you made us act like one. That's rarer. Before he could respond, a shuttle buzzed overhead, skimming low toward the outer docking ring. Garal walked past them, his pack slung easily over one shoulder. As he passed, he paused, pulled a tiny carved figure from his belt pouch, a wooden model of the signal tower, and placed it in Kale's hand. No words, just a gift. Then he left. Kale stared at it, the tiny replica bound with perfect thread lashings. Jorix followed close behind. You didn't have to give me half your rations that night. You would have done the same. I wouldn't have, Jorix said, but I might now. He walked off. The sky darkened to a deep violet. Stars flickered overhead, shuttles blinked like fireflies against the black. Kale sat on the edge of the plaza, tired but steady. He wasn't stronger than the others. He hadn't outsmarted the trial. He just hadn't walked away. And when the world broke down around them, bit, stung, burned, and screamed, he had done the only thing he knew how to do. He had stayed. That was enough. It always had been.